Donald Trump has realized that the war in Ukraine is more complicated than he thought. What tactics will he choose now? And will the sleeping American leader be able to solve anything? This and other topics we'll discuss right now. My name is Iryna Uzlova, and today with us is Yuri Rashkin, host of YouTube channels Rashkin Report in English, Rashkin News, and also the author of Substack, Yuri Rashkin. Yuri, hello, glad to see you. Thank you for joining us today and always.
Thank you for having me.
12 years ago, Putin illegally annexed Crimea. At the time, the civilized world swallowed it and expressed only concern. How do you think has the West learned from this mistake? And is it ready to take the Kremlin head-on now?
I think probably the most important lesson to me that should be taken away by anybody from the last 12 years is the inconsistency of American policy, because we have some presidents that have diametrically different points of view and policies than other president who's been president twice in the last 12 years, significantly affecting the outcome of what happened in Ukraine and what's going on in Ukraine, and national security and world security. So I think that speaks to the general inconsistency that is driven by the fact that in the United States, being a two-party system, even though there's other parties, but you have two parties and one of them combines everything from the right onto the center somewhere, and the other one combines everything from the left onto the center. And we have just these really incompatible points of view that are clashing into each other more and more with every election. And the world pays the price. In that instance, I guess from that point of view, it's important to acknowledge what has occurred 12 years ago, because United States did not stand up for Ukraine. Ukraine was being challenged by its own revolutionary uprising. And as a result, Russia used its opportunity. As one comparison I heard that made sense to me is when your neighbor's fire is house is on fire, and then somebody runs in and grabs the dresser and runs out. Well, you won't be needing this anymore. Well, I think what actually Maidan has showed is that was a rebirth for Ukrainian nation and the Ukrainian state and Ukrainian identity. And everything that has followed after that in the last 12 years. And it's important to acknowledge 12 years, because when I talk about it, when other people talk about it, there's this always desire to say the war. 4 years, but really the war has been going on for 12 years, since 2014, and I think Ukrainians are very, very clear about knowing the distinction. And with all of that, watching this, I see how West has grown up and matured, and will never be mature enough at this pace to handle Putin the way West prefers to handle Putin. It's just not the kind of challenge that today's West is able to handle, because we want to do things peacefully, we want to do things nice, we want to do things with sanctions, with pressures, but even NATO is a defense alliance. And what we're dealing with is a threat. Russia is a threat to Ukraine, and it's a threat to all of its neighbors. First of all, because Russian president has this crazy idea that it's his job to restore the Soviet Union, at least in scope and size, and terrorist influence all over the world. And that means that as long as the countries surrounding Russia, that used to be former republics in particular, don't start working together in terms of taking on this threat in a proactive way, taking advantage of the opportunity that Russia has been tremendously weakened over the last 12 years of constant war that's not been only affecting Ukraine, but has also been affecting Russia. Yes, there's people who will say, Moscow still parties, lights are on, and life is great. but they know it's on borrowed time. I think they know how things are going in a wrong direction simply because of the scope of the celebration of Chinese New Year in Moscow this year, which is now, I understand, the biggest holiday over there. So, hello, China. And so this war has been absolutely affecting both Ukraine and Russia. And this means that the countries, both there's responsibility, of course, first and foremost, on the people of Russia to take charge of their own situation instead of feeding themselves to Putin and just hoping that the war will end before they are destroyed. But I think there's also responsibility on other countries surrounding Russia to take a more proactive approach, knowing that whatever, or at least more actively helping Ukraine. Because I think if we learned anything from 12 years, it's that Russia doesn't act sensibly. Russia doesn't act in a way that is predictable and guidable and agreeable to. We've seen so many agreements between Russia and Ukraine destroyed and just used as a pause for fake peace, as Secretary Blinken said in the past. Everybody knows that making peace with Russia, where you still have Putin, who will not follow any peace agreement, is another, I think, lesson of the last dozen years that this war has been going on. And it should be a very good reminder that this war has been going on under Zelensky, under Poroshenko, who was the leader of Ukraine prior to Zelensky. And this war was going on under Joe Biden, but also under Donald Trump, who was president at the time when this war started. And there's responsibility, first of all, on a lot of different people, but there's also should be an understanding, if not in Kremlin, then in the rest of the world, that changing Zelensky for another leader is not going to address Russia's desires, because Russia just wants to conquer Ukraine, because whoever is going to be in charge of Ukraine, whoever Ukrainians elect their president, will stand up for Ukrainian statehood. Otherwise, what's the point of being a president of Ukraine? You just don't, otherwise you're a governor. And I think that there will be people, should there break out peace and should peace somehow occur, because Putin and Trump seem to be so hell-bent on getting rid of Zelensky through elections, if no other way is possible, then we will see that this administration will just get involved again in democratic process in other countries. But that's another conversation, and hopefully we can get to that point where this 12 years of war is going to end, and we're going to talk about politics instead of where we had first 8 years of war, and then it took to a whole new level, and now we had the new level for the last 4 years. I hope we're not going to be discussing how this takes a new escalation step, but that requires the West stepping up and supporting Ukraine stronger and stronger.
I agree, Yuri, that Moscow is economically and militarily exhausted, but not completely. At the same time, as political strategist Taras Zagorodny always advises, we need to watch, for example, Trump's actions, not his words, and through his own hands, the United States extended sanctions against Russia for another year. The corresponding decree was published on the U.S. Federal Register website. I'm extending for another year the national emergency. The document states this decree extends a number of anti-Russian sanctions imposed in September 2018 for Russia's occupation of Ukrainian Crimea and in February 2022 for Moscow's recognition of the independence of the so-called DNR, LNR, as well as emergency measures imposed in 2014 due to threats to Ukraine's territorial integrity. These sanctions were set to expire on March 6, 2026. The White House also has stated that it is considering tightening sanctions against Russia. Further restrictions will depend on peace negotiations. The Kremlin accuses the U.S. of being ambivalent and has already responded to the sanctions extension. Official Moscow, represented by Putin's press secretary Dmitry Peskov, called the sanctions extension a mere automatic decision and no more. The Kremlin, they say, had no inflated expectations. What does Trump's move to extend sanctions indicate, and how do you assess the Kremlin's reaction? Because, for example, journalist Dmitry Gordon told me that Putin is actually afraid of Trump, really.
I think it's very generous of you to call Dmitry Gordon a journalist. I think that when we talk about, again, Mr. Zagorodny, Pan Zagorodny, I don't want to argue with, I think it makes sense. Yes, we should pay attention to not what Trump says, but what Trump does. And but I think we also have to pay attention to a couple of different things about things he says, which is how he says it. And when people tell you who they are, it's best to pay attention. So with those two caveats in mind, for instance, the sanctions, I find it fascinating that I think only publication that reflected it is Ukrinform, so like a Ukrainian news platform that I saw this in, and then I followed and I saw the actual document, which lacks signature of president. And when it references stuff that happened with Biden, it just says president. So we know that this was done kind of in the dark of the night without trying to publicize this in any way, but yet it still was renewed. What's going on? And I think that to Trump, if we presume that Trump and Putin are basically functioning by the same set of rules and guidelines and approaches, sanctions are leverage. And they are the pieces on the board that he can at any point take away, but he can leave them there because he understands, if we look at it jokingly, that Putin will never call Trump again if there's no sanctions. So to make sure that Putin keeps calling Trump, you got to have some sanctions. But at the same time, we see that the process is hollowed out. We see the enforcement mechanism is lacking. We see waivers, which means money can be paid for some waivers, or, there's opportunities to go around sanctions, but yet they provide Trump with useful leverage. And it's important when we consider what's going on that there's a story in New York Times the other day that highlights how a friend of Don Jr. is now exploring possibility of working energy development with the Russian side because, sanctions are going to end at some point. So they are making plans for the future, even though they did renew it. So we have to keep in mind that they're using this as leverage, but with the opportunity, with a plan to give it, to eventually get rid of sanctions, because that's just a negotiation tool for a better deal for Trump. And when we look at Kremlin reaction, what were they upset about there?
Peskov said that it was only automatic decision about sanctions.
It was automatic decision, but we know that Trump does not like things that are automatic. That's actually the beautiful thing that would have been really nice if there were more things that were automatic. That's really nice. Like sanctions, it would be nice if they were automatic. Military consequences for violation of airspace would be nice if that was automatic. Unfortunately, it's not. And unfortunately, we see that very little is automatic, but we see that some things are almost anonymous. And that's where that sanctions document of page and a half of text, mostly listing numbers and saying what president and dates, is what we're going to get. I think that's the kind of pressure that Trump is just willing to apply to Russia. I'm glad that there's something, but I guess if in his position, you got to have something. Otherwise, you got nothing.
At the same time, Donald Trump admitted that it didn't work out in 24 hours, as the war in Ukraine turned out to be more difficult than he expected. Trump shared his incredible and obvious conclusions during the first meeting of his toy institution, the Board of Peace, which took place yesterday in Washington and brought together the leaders of about 20 of the world's least powerful countries, during which Trump successfully got a couple of hours of sleep. We are in the first year, which is apparently unparalleled in our country, because we are ended 8 wars, mentioned Trump, and I think the 9th is still ahead. It turned out to be more difficult, recognized him. I just thought it would be the easiest. In war, you never know what will be easy and what won't. So, but if Trump had put pressure on Putin, more pressure, everything would have been much easier.
I feel that the Board of Peace idea is looking kind of dead because Trump showed up. Nobody wanted to televise it. He was surrounded by, a club of dictators. And so all the shithole countries, pardon my Trumpism, that he said that all those people are sending us their people. Well, that's the countries that actually supported Trump in this venture, because no normal country will stand next to him on that stage. And it's nice that we see that there's people in this world that are willing to amuse our elderly president, who is like a nursing home for the super wealthy, and he likes to like share his points of view and see people sitting around. But it's a joke that is highlighting to what extent who are now our allies. Where's Europe? Where oh wait a minute, there's Viktor Orban, and there's and it's also very important a reminder to who are now the allies of this administration. And yes, these are more words, but again, words in this you have to take in the context. If Donald Trump likes to fall asleep to people praising him, that's fantastic. That's an interesting point of view, because sometimes falling in front of a TV that talks about you is not enough. You got to have like live people gather, and then maybe this is the quality of his sleep dramatically improves at that point. Maybe that's one of those narcissistic things that is just the next thing. You should gather important people who will tell you how great you are while you're sleeping. But that's our president, and it's important to see that he was dismissed by so many people. And it's also important to see that he's discussing issues not in the through United Nations format, but through his club of dictators. Had he been younger, this would have been much more dangerous. But considering what a gigantic failure this president his policies have been on any number of levels, I feel like we're approaching a level of almost nuclear war, unless he falls asleep and just doesn't wake up. And knowing this president, it will probably occur on live TV.
But really, this institution, Board of Peace, is like a very, very big joke. We cannot explain for what is the main aim of this new Trump story, really.
It is a good question, because I think it's clearer what we're going to do with Iran than what is the point of Board of Peace. Because when we're looking at all the, okay, it's originally for Gaza, but it has already seems to have far superseded Gaza, although that's still part of it. And I guess, what do boards do in Trump's mind? Boards raise money. And maybe just the board itself is raising money for Trump, because $1 billion, wow, that's some good money for Belarus. But I think that this is just a toy that this president has created for himself, and it shows who is willing to play his games, because these are people. This is a totally different administration, where they take things like human rights and kick them to the curb. If they take human dignity and they kick it out, and they arrest it and they deport it, because what they're looking for is this is the club that this administration belongs in. And it's a very clear message to American voters as well, who are looking at this for 5 seconds as they think about what's going on, who are our allies and not, and what happened. And I think this is going to be great footage before elections. But also, I think about the fact that the Soviet Union had a board of peace, or some very similar, that Stalin started, and was quite active, and they regularly found that Brezhnev was the biggest defender of peace in the world. And then when Soviet Union fell apart, this whole thing, the board of peace of Soviet Union fell apart. So I think that this is another institution that is being held together by duct tape of Donald Trump. And when Donald Trump is gone, all these institutions are going to vanish and disappear, because they are not needed to anybody. I've done many different projects on a community level, and you see that if this is a project that other people, that you're only one who is interested in, that if you leave it, the project falls apart. Nobody else cares. But if you leave and other people step in and they take it over, that means somebody else needs it. This board of peace looks like nobody needs it except Donald Trump. It doesn't doesn't help him with the voters. It doesn't help him with, well, it does help him put money in his pocket, and it does help him with the praise. So on that level, this is just a kind of a narcissistic exercise that unfortunately shows to what extent American voters are willing to tolerate our president acting in this immature, childish manner, where, I don't know, I wouldn't have surprised me if the stage was built out of Legos. It's just kids stuff, but we were playing with real lives, and that's what's kind of worrying a lot of people, because this is president of the United States with access to nuclear weapons, and he's acting like Putin, which actually kind of makes sense, because they both seem to operate, again, by the same set of rules and guidelines. And if we accept that, it gets much easier to explain Trump's behavior, because look at Putin and his weird economic gatherings where, he might arrest the biggest person there if he doesn't like him, but still, come on down, because Putin is the big star, and he'll hold this economic summit of Davos of Siberia, and wherever he wants to. That's what Trump does now. Is this going to outlive Putin? No, but Putin is even younger than Trump. This is so interesting, because Barack Obama recently gave a really nice big interview speaking about how Democrats need to work together to create a majority. It was really good. And then he says, I'm old, because I'm already 64, and so I'm kind of not quite in touch with people. And I'm going, and I'm not alone, thinking that Donald Trump is 15 years older now, and he still has 3 years. And Barack Obama's been retired for how many years? So it's a wild world we live in. It's the crazy states, United States of America.
Crazy Trump. And it seems that he created this board of peace for his self-affirmation, something like this. According to Western media reports, Trump has several scenarios on the table regarding Iran. Trump stated that he was considering a limited strike on Iran when asked by a reporter whether he was considering a military option in the absence of an agreement with Tehran. The US president replied, "The most I can say is that I am considering that option." Why is he still hesitating and delaying the process? How do you think?
I think at this point, it appears that things are going so poorly for Donald Trump that limited strike on Iran might not solve the problems that he's facing. I think we need to start preparing ourselves for a small nuclear war. Because when we're looking at a president who is failing at everything he touches, and he's just been given another huge defeat called the rejection of his tariff policy, this president will need some serious distraction. And he was hoping to distract the world by, creating peace, arranging for peace between Ukraine and Russia. But it turns out that his understanding of his relationship with Putin versus Putin's desire for Ukraine was out of whack. Now he's got pretty, few options, and as he's losing control over economic leverage, incidentally, who is going to be now making deals with Trump when all of his tariffs are declared illegal? This just seems, another craziness here. Clearly, Iran seems like they are going to get it, because Trump needs a good, successful victory outcome, but he manages to screw up pretty much everything he touches. That's also his kind of a reputation. So I think Iran seems like they're preparing for war. I think American public is being prepared for war. Also, this is an important feature of American public. Part of us being prepared for war is kind of like asking for our consent. Because if we are really, really opposed to it, this is the public input moment. Because if people, United States citizens, are upset about this situation, and we know that Trump is getting ready, yes, Trump is setting up a cliffhanger for another episode of Trump Show. But for Americans, it might not feel so breezy peasy, because Trump's going to create another crisis and then he's going to fix it. Especially after the tariffs fiasco, when people are going to be demanding their money back now from Trump. This is so classic because he can't. He's going to come up with any sort of a way because that money's been spent 4 times in different direction. So again, war with Iran seems like a real attractive option right now, just considering that what else can he talk about? When Bill Gates decides against speaking at a conference because of the Epstein fallout, but our president continues to show up every day all over the place, it really messes with our heads as well. So when this president gets ready to go to war, I think there could be a lot of frustration from a lot of different people who are going to flush it out on their elected officials, and I expect the phone calls to explode in number towards congressmen and senators, and those people are going to be putting pressure on Trump to think through the situation, not to make it worse, but again, Trump makes things worse. So I think we have to prepare ourselves for an attack on Iran, and the one thing that does not seem likely is that there will be boots on the ground. That seems to be something that is not in the interests, in the wheelhouse of this president, who, as we saw after No Kings 2 protest, he would like to fly over, dump, and fly away. So I think that's going to be the model that I'm expecting at this point.
Yuri, thank you very much for this conversation, for your thoughts. See you next week. Take care.
Take care.
Yuri Rashkin, host of YouTube channel Rashkin Report in English, Rashkin News. My name is Iryna Uzlova. Guys, thank you for joining and watching us. Subscribe to our YouTube channels and take care.